Hello and welcome to another episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings. I am Brian Nemhauser. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Hawk Blogger, and this is the last in the pre-recorded episodes I am putting together before I head out on my vacation. And tomorrow I will be back live talking to you all, chatting about the Seahawks. Looking forward to it. Who knows what kind of news will break between now and then? You might be like wondering what I am doing, not talking about Seahawks news. Who knows? Maybe there'll be a signing, a trade. All those things could happen while I'm gone, but realistically, they probably won't. It's a pretty quiet part of the year. Either way, I will be looking forward to catching back up with all of you when I get back. Should be tomorrow, depending on when you are watching this video. If you are a suite level YouTube member, you might be watching this video before I even leave because you get access to this show whenever you want. You can wait until, what would it be? It would be the 28th of June to watch this show, or you can watch it right now. So for everyone that's not a suite level YouTube member, you get to watch this show on the 28th at 8 a.m. And hopefully you guys have enjoyed some of the content I have prepared for y'all while I was gone. Today's episode is focusing specifically on red zone. I did a pretty in-depth overview of what went on with the Seahawks third down offense and defense, and got so deep that I ended up writing a pretty long article about it that went into it in a bunch of different ways. And I knew that I wanted to circle back and look at red zone as well. What I'm going to try to do here is just start to scratch the surface a little bit on red zone offense. I don't think this will probably be the deepest dive that I will do, but it is starting to diagnose some of what I think the problems are and potentially what some of the solutions may be to what was a legitimate problem for the Seahawks last year. The Seahawks, if you are not familiar, this isn't actually even new. The Seahawks were the 28th ranked red zone offense by touchdown percentage. For people that aren't familiar, generally the way you rank red zone offenses in the NFL is of your red zone possessions, what percentage of those turn into touchdowns. In 2022, the Seahawks ranked 28th in the NFL with only 47% of the red zone trips turning into touchdowns. To give you an idea what the best in the league in 2022 we're doing, it was 71%. That was the Dallas Cowboys. The Chiefs were 69%. So you are talking about a massive difference just there in terms of points for your team over a given season. Let's take a quick look. I mean, even there, I'm going to do some math in real time. So this will take a second because I'm going to add up a couple things across a couple different years. So forgive me as I throw a quick sheet together with some data. But if we look at 2022, the Seahawks they had 55 red zone possessions. They had 26 red zone touchdowns. We will come back to that in a second. If we go to 2023, the Seahawks were actually worse in terms of where they ranked. Actually, that's not true. The Seahawks were a little bit better. They ranked 25th in touchdown rate in the red zone. They had 26 touchdowns in 54 possessions. So over the course of 2 years, that equals 52 touchdowns in 109 attempts, which equals probably a 47%. Yeah, 47.7% rate of turning those into touchdowns. Well, if they were the best in the league, let's just say, because in 2022, I talked to you about the Chiefs and the Cowboys, they're up there close to 70%. In 2023, the San Francisco 49ers, the Miami Dolphins, the Detroit Lions, the Rams, these were the best teams in the NFL in red zone offense. And the 49ers were 67%, and then 66 for the Dolphins. So let's say, like, 67%. If the Seahawks just were 67% of their, if they just converted 67%, just, what would that have meant? What would that have meant in terms of how many touchdowns, more touchdowns they would have scored um, in each of the last two seasons? Well, it would have meant, oops, it would have meant uh, 21 additional touchdowns scored. And if you think about that in terms of, let's assume that this isn't true at all, but let's assume that all the other opportunities were field goals. So let's assume just uh, a 4-point difference. You're talking about 84 points additionally per year. And if you evenly divide that 84 points across, so divide that by 2, you get 42 points per season. Um, divide that by 17 games. That's an additional 2.5 points per game, which is huge. I mean, that's a huge, like, just one change to the way the offense performs could add an additional 2.5 points per game. You may hear my dog Finn getting excited because there's someone outside, so you might see him running around. But welcome to my life. But in any event, just to illustrate the point that when you're talking about being one of the worst red zone teams in the NFL, you are hemorrhaging points every year. And it is hard enough to sustain an offense to get yourself into the red zone. And so once you already get to the red zone and you can't convert those to touchdowns, then you're really, really hurting. So this is, I feel like, one of the places where the Seahawks really need to make a jump. And I don't know about you, but my first thought was, this is maybe a Geno problem. Maybe Geno is not good in the red zone. I felt like specifically last year, I didn't think he was a particularly good red zone quarterback. And when I went back and looked, that was confirmed. Geno Smith, his red zone passer rating last year was 77.9. And that's not great. In fact, I'm kind of curious. I'm going to do this in real time. So again, it might take me a second, but I know you guys are all patient and you'll be nice and let me do this because we'll all learn together. So if I look, let me see. Do I have this easily accessible? Yeah, let's do this. Let's look at 2023 and we will look at passes only in the red zone. And we will see where Geno Smith ranked in terms of passer rating in the red zone last year. I would bet it's going to be toward the bottom, honestly. And let's take a quick look. Passer rating. There's going to be a bunch of guys in here that are really not guys that have played enough to make a difference. If you get into really the top rated quarterback that had enough opportunities for it to matter, you're talking about Brock Purdy at number 1 with a 109.1 passer rating, 109.6 actually. Hold on, guys. I'm going to get my dog out of here. 1 second. All right, I'm back. Sorry about that. So Brock Purdy, 109.6 passer rating in the red zone. Jalen Hurts was 109.3, so he was quite good. Jared Goff was 106.8. You start really scrolling down here and you're looking for where Geno Smith is. He is well down the list. I'm still scrolling. I mean, Geno Smith checks in with a 77.9 passer rating. Unfortunately, if you're thinking, oh, Sam Howell, maybe he's good. Sam Howell was 75.0, so he was below Geno Smith. They were two of the worst red zone quarterbacks in the NFL last season. Interestingly, Kirk Cousins, even though he played fewer games, he was even lower. He had a 67.7 passer rating in the red zone last year. But this is not where, I mean, you don't want to be below Desmond Ridder in passer rating. So Geno Smith was not great passing in the red zone last year. So the 100%, that was part of the problem last year. But keep in mind, this is at least a 2-year problem. Geno Smith has been a starter for 2 years. So what about the year before? Well, the year before was kind of the exact opposite. Geno Smith was one of the best red zone passers in the NFL. And I'll go and double check this again. But his 2023 passer rating in the red zone, or sorry, 2022, sorry to confuse. So 2022, it was 101.1. He was excellent in the red zone. And yet the Seahawks, if you remember, were still one of the worst red zone offenses. And so I'm going to go and just double check. But if I look here, as far as guys that got a lot of opportunities in the red zone, Tua Tagovailoa was tops in 2022. Justin Fields actually did reasonably well, but it was a lower number of opportunities. Dak Prescott did really well. Tom Brady, not a surprise there. Joe Burrow, and then you really get into Geno Smith right around there. So Geno Smith was one of the best red zone passers just 2 years ago. And so I don't think it's as simple as, oh, Geno Smith's the problem. You've got to solve that. The other piece that I think shows up is red zone. Everyone assumes red zone offense is about passing, but there's actually another thing you can do when you are playing offense. You do not only have to pass the ball. And this is where I think things really jump out to me. So last year in the red zone, the Seahawks averaged the worst yards per carry, yards per attempt rushing of any team in football. They averaged 1.7 yards per rush in the red zone. They were an awful red zone rushing team. And I mean, 32 out of 32. And the next closest teams had 2 yards per carry. So the difference between 32 and 31 is large. It's a large gap. The Seahawks were by far the worst running team in the red zone in the NFL. And it matters because if you want to talk about the best teams when it comes to rushing in the red zone, some of these teams, it's not going to come as a huge surprise. Some of these were some of the best red zone offenses in the NFL. So if I go back and I look at the best red zone offenses in the NFL last year, the 49ers, the Dolphins, the Lions, the Rams, the Commanders, interestingly, the Bills, there's 6. Okay. The Ravens, by the way, were 7. So there's your best red zone offenses. Remember those names: 49ers, Dolphins, Lions, Rams, Commanders, Bills. If you then go back and you look at running, the Commanders were the number 1 rushing offense in the red zone in the NFL. And we just heard that Sam Howell was not good passing. So they managed to be one of the best red zone offenses in the NFL, despite having inferior pass efficiency. Because why? Because they were able to run the ball. Another team that was good in the red zone that you wouldn't necessarily expect to be, the Patriots were 11th in the NFL in red zone offense. And that's not like top 5, top 6, but that's certainly a lot better than the Seahawks, where they were 25th, 26th, in the red zone. And the Patriots were the number 2 rushing team in the NFL at 3.2 yards per carry. So the 49ers were the 5th highest at 3.1, the Lions 3.1, the Rams 3.1, the Dolphins 3. Like, you have all these teams that are effective at running the ball in the red zone. And the Seahawks just were not. And so I think that there's too much focus on the passing game when it comes to effectively figuring out what to do with the red zone offense. And that was maybe my biggest takeaway in some of my research that I did here, because that just jumps off the page. When you were the worst at something in the NFL by a large margin, that jumps out. Now, were they just as bad in 2022? No, actually, they weren't. So if you go back and we look at 2022, um, the Seahawks were the ninth best rushing team in the red zone in 2022. Now, that didn't solve all their problems. So I don't think that it's just as simple as, hey, run the ball better. But I do think that points to something that, I mean, you had the same offensive coordinator in Shane Waldron. You had the same quarterback. You had the same starting running back in Kenneth Walker. What that implies to me is the difference is the offensive line and the injury to Abe Lucas. I think Abe Lucas played a role down there, especially. And then potentially, other parts of that offensive line that underperformed last year. So I think that this points to me to offensive line, again, being a big question mark for being able to play in these tight spaces and get these really hard-earned yards. When I did the third down breakdown in that other show, in that other episode, and in the article on hawkblogger.com, I talked about just how third and short was just a bugaboo for this team on both sides of the ball, offense and defense. And that, again, points to these kind of hard-earned yards that the Seahawks were just not equipped to gain last year. So I think that that's a big one to keep an eye on. If you look at yards per play overall in the red zone, the Seahawks were 17th in the NFL in 2022. And they were 31st last year. So they went from 17th to 31st in yards per play in the red zone. They averaged 2 yards per play in the red zone last year. They were just an atrocious red zone offense. And so that kind of brings me to, okay, so we have some diagnosis here. Geno Smith was excellent one year, not very good the next. You had the running offense, reasonably good one year, awful the next. And one of the things that I'm kind of curious about is, like, so how did Ryan Grubb do in this regard? How did the Huskies do in the red zone? Is this something that he was particularly skilled at or not? And I'll tell you that in a second. One thing that I did look at that I thought was worth checking out was for 2023, what percentage of the Seahawks plays were running plays in the red zone? And the Seahawks had just 32%, actually 33% of their red zone plays were rushing plays. And that ranked 25th in the NFL. So a lot of these teams, I think they ran more often, and I think they ran more effectively. So I think that that is something that you have to hopefully accomplish this year. I think Zach Charbonnet getting some more carries, more opportunities could be part of that solution as well, but time will tell. So getting to Ryan Grubb, in 2023 with the Huskies had the 29th ranked red zone offense in college football. And I mean, keep in mind, you're talking about out of 133 teams. So it's not a 32 team group. Ranking 29th is good. It's not like amazing, but it's good. They scored on 67%. They scored touchdowns on 67% of their possessions. That's excellent. And there weren't, a lot of big teams that did a lot better. Oregon's a team that ranked 8th. They scored on 75% of their red zone possessions. Penn State ranked 6th with 76. I would have never guessed this, but the Oregon State Beavers actually ranked number 1 in the nation last year, scoring touchdowns on 79% of their possessions. Big difference there is they had 42 red zone opportunities where the Huskies had 80 or 73. So you're talking about a pretty huge disparity in terms of the opportunities. And that is worth mentioning. The Huskies had the 3rd most red zone chances in the nation. Generally, the more you get, the harder it's going to be to convert all of them. There's probably going to be some of those that are kneel downs at ends of games if you're a very good team where you're going to kick a field goal just to be, not run up the score. So there are some things that I think can contribute to teams. If you're getting to the red zone among the most in the NFL, then you're in a pretty good spot and you can afford to be a little bit less efficient. If you go back to 2022 for the Huskies, the story isn't quite as rosy. They do. I'm scrolling down to see. I hadn't looked at this before in terms of how many red zone attempts they got. Sorry. So red zone attempts, they were 8th in the country. So they're still quite high. Their touchdown percentage was not as efficient. So they were, I think, 49th. Let me double check. 43rd. 43rd in the nation with a pretty close to the same rate, 66% versus I think it was like 67 or 68 in 2023. So Ryan Grubb was pretty effective in the red zone both years that he coached the Huskies offense. What I'm not able to get access to is like how often did he run and what's the percentage of those plays that were running plays. But I do know that Ryan Grubb, one of the things he was excellent at is finding ways like his fade passes from Penix to Odunze in those situations were pretty amazing. That might be player specific. This is not an area that Geno Smith and DK Metcalf have perfected or even gotten to decent at. And I think that's something to monitor. But I do believe that one of the things Ryan Grubb does really well is he uses the wide space in when you get down, if you're on one hash, being able to create space for things like fade patterns, for other kind of running plays. I think that his motion opens up the middle at this point on this field and creates some opportunities for running plays as well. So, we've already heard one of the things that's pretty positive, which we've heard in OTAs to this point, Jackson Smith and Jigba becoming a real target for Geno Smith in these red zone opportunities, scoring almost at will. I think 7, 8, 9 touchdowns, whatever it is, in one day in red zone drills. And so this is just going to be a really key part of whether this offense can make the leap that we all expect it and want it to. And I think some of the key aspects of that are going to be obviously adding Ryan Grubb to the mix. I think the offensive line play, this is where, a guy like Christian Haynes or Anthony Bradford really proving that they can be a physical force. If you can pair them with a Abe Lucas coming back, you're in a much different situation to gain 2 yards, a half a yard at the goal line, whatever it is that you were hoping that Jake Curran could do that, or 41-year-old Jason Peters last year. It was a very different situation at right tackle. And even at right guard, you had a rotation of Phil Haynes sometimes when he was healthy, and then Anthony Bradford as a rookie. It was a really awful right side of that line. And in addition, you got Oluwatimi, who, is going to get this opportunity to take over at center. So, it could go all along that line. Laken Tomlinson is, I think, a more physical run blocker than Damian Lewis and has an opportunity to help there as well. So we will see how this plays out. I think that they have more weapons to play with. I think Jackson Smith and Jigba is going to be a different player. Zach Charbonnet is going to be a different player. And you now have, different people to plug and play on the offensive line. And you've got a offensive coordinator in Ryan Grubb who has a pretty good track record of converting opportunities to touchdowns in the red zone. So let's see how that pans out. I think it's going to be a pretty key part of this story. I will do some more work and some more research on both the red zone offense and some of the individual players involved, but also look at red zone defense, because I think that's another part of this story. We had third down problems. The Seattle Seahawks had third down problems on both sides of the ball. I think red zone is another place where there's some issues on both sides of the ball. And we'll take a look at that. So thank you for tuning in for this. Hopefully, it gives you a little bit of insight about just what kind of issues the Seahawks were facing in the red zone last year and what they need to do to start turning that around. Uh, Again, I will be back live tomorrow. Please give the show a like and click subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. And until then, I'm Brian Nemhauser, and this has been another episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings.